Can I address a question to Ms. Stewart?
Speak loudly,
Either
sir.
to Fran or to Margaret or to
Oh, okay.
Joan.
I don't remember when the exact date of the Fugitive Slave Act was.
The most horrendous one was in 1850. There had been an Fugitive Slave Act on the books since the 1790s. But the Fugitive Slave Act of 1850 made it a crime. So what we're doing here really is celebrating criminal activity.
So it made the business too for some people to.
True.
There had to be some terrible casualties.
That's true.
People who did not make it were apprehended.
True.
I wonder if that's ever true.
Well, you mean people who were caught and sent back?
Yeah.
Well, John Parker, who's another one, if you go to Ripley, I mean, you really should travel to Ripley. It is such a great town. Ripley was also home to John Parker. And John Parker's story was not recovered and not told until 1996. And he had been interviewed by a journalist in late 1800s, early 1900s. And he had been a black man who'd started his life as a slave and had been sold away from his mother to Alabama on a slave coffle. And he ran away the first time by himself and got caught, and then found himself owned by a widow from Mobile, Alabama. And he cut a deal with her that if he could buy where she told him that if he'd pay $1,800 plus tax, that he could buy his freedom. And so he applied himself. He'd learned the skills of an iron foundry, and so he bought his freedom as a teenager, and then moved to Cincinnati, and later established an iron foundry in Ripley, where he employed both black and white workers. Has patents. He has many patents to his name, and he would, by night, I can't believe that his story hasn't been turned into a movie, because it's so incredible. At night, he would row across the Ohio River and fetch people to slavery, whether they were ready to go or not. I mean, sometimes he said, "Come on, you're going with me." He had a price on his head of $2,500, and people were always after him, to the point that in his old age he would walk down the middle of the street because he was afraid that he didn't want somebody to be able to drag him into an alley. And he always carried I think it was a blade at the end of his cane or something, because he was very afraid. And he himself was supposed to have rescued more than 400 people, but all of his records were destroyed because he was afraid.
His name again?
John Parker. But the thing that really irked people up here, the most egregious thing about the Fugitive Slave Act, so you faced $1,000 fine, 6 months imprisonment, and confiscation of all your property if you were caught aiding and abetting slaves. That's the federal crime. In Kentucky, you could get 5 to 20 years in the state penitentiary if you were caught. But the other thing about the Fugitive Slave Act of 1850 was that it compelled people, whether you believed in slavery or not, the U.S. Marshal could come and say, "You have to help us find this fugitive in your area," and it forced people to engage in an activity that many of them thought reprehensible. And so that was one of the things that got communities that maybe would tolerate the notion of slavery off the sidelines and said, we've got to take a stand.